Welcome to Dog Training Bytes. The show where canine professionals share their key takeaways, big aha moments, and hardest lessons learned from working with dogs. I'm Mattison, certified dog trainer and behavior consultant, and dogs are my life. Every day I get to coach guardians and other trainers into a deeper understanding of canine behavior. But let's face it, sometimes dog training really bites. And that's okay, because when it does, we learn a lot. This podcast is all about sharing the lessons learned from experience, because the stories of when it got tough or when we made a mistake, that's when we learn the lessons worth learning. And it's time we share those with the world. I'll be talking to dog trainers and other pet professionals about times that working with dogs, well, bit. Not literally. Maybe literally. What's most important here on this show, what did they walk away with? What did they learn? How did it shape their approach today? Welcome to Dog Training Bytes, the show where pet professionals share personal lessons that you won't find in any textbook. Today, I have someone who is, all at the same time, a student, colleague, and friend, Holly Dolinski. Holly, owner of Holly's Dog Training Academy in Bucharest, Romania, is a certified family dog mediator and a graduate of both the Tulsa Pack Athletics Virtual Training Apprenticeship and my own Advanced Canine Behavior Mentorship. She has a ton of hands-on experience with shelter dogs and street dogs and teaches obedience, nose work, and works with dogs with challenging behaviors. She has a strong passion for environmentally focused dogs, as well as the dogs who, at first, seem impossible to motivate. Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this episode with me.
Hello, it's awesome to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So my first question to ask you for the wonderful dog people out there is to talk about the personal dogs in your life, which I know a little bit about them, but I'm excited to hear even more about them.
Yes, so the dogs in my life are Unite. They are two street dogs, brother and sister. And a fun fact about them is they were born two houses away from my house on our same street. So I've had the pleasure of knowing them since birth, and yes, and caring for them since birth, and also knowing their parents. They are truly wonderful dogs, and they have been wonderful teachers to me. Most of the things I've actually learned from them, which is saying a lot because I've learned from so many people and so many different dogs, and they've taught me so much. They have been also wonderful students, and especially when I wasn't the best teacher, which I still am not the best teacher, but I'm way better than I was. But they were still wonderful students. And I dare say that they're the first street dogs from Romania that have learned nose work. I'm
I
not sure
love
of
it.
that, but I would say that they are.
Would you
Yeah,
consider them to fall into that group of dogs of the environmentally focused dogs?
absolutely. And difficult to motivate. At first, I had no idea. Nothing was working really. And that's where I found that I have to really upgrade my methods and start looking into different things and different ways to motivate them because they were absolutely not cooperating with me the traditional way, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, for what it's worth, I feel the same way about you that you feel about them, which was that I learned a lot from you when you were my student, and it is such a two-way street and such a wonderful relationship for me to have because you challenge me to be better as a teacher all the time.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I am so excited to hear the story that I think is reaching back into the past a little bit, so I know I don't know this one.
Yes, so my story is taken from my childhood. I was maybe 10 years old, and I was with my mom and my grandmother. We were going to a park. It's one of the bigger parks in Bucharest and well known. And a fact about Bucharest and Romania is we have a lot of street dogs roaming our streets. And when I was little, there were even more than there are now.
I feel this is probably different to what a lot of our listeners experience on a day-to-day basis. If it's different now than it was then, feel free to let me know. On an average trip out, an average walk around the block, an average trip into town, like how many dogs are you seeing?
Well, when I was little, you would see 15 to 20 dogs. Now, it depends on the area a lot now. Where I live, you would still see about 10 dogs, maybe even 50, but in more urban areas, like very concentrated areas, maybe 3 to 5 dogs. You still
Okay.
see them around.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so going back to the story, we had just arrived at the park and I got down from the car. My mom and grandmother went to take our bikes out of the trunk. And I was just prancing around and jumping and playing, doing all the things a little girl would do. And I had noticed that next to our car, there were 3 street dogs laying down. They were just minding their own business. They were just relaxing. And I kept running in their vicinity. I was still jumping, and at one point, without really noticing, I ran towards them without the intention of scaring them or doing anything. I just ran towards them. And when I got really close to them, all 3 of them lunged at me.
Wow.
And that was it. They just lunged and then they
Yeah.
stopped and they went back to their positions. And I remember I was a little startled, and my
You
mom
would
came
be.
out.
Yeah.
And my mom came right away to ask what happened. And I told her, well, these dogs just jumped at me. And I remember the first thing she said, like she wasn't even surprised or anything. The first thing she said was, okay, but what did you do?
Oh, I like your
And
mom. I like
yeah,
your mom.
me too. And I said, yeah, well, I ran towards them. And she was like, well, there you have it. That's what happens. And I remember going out of that situation, not feeling frightened or anything. I just felt like I understood everything that happened. And I was more informed in the future to
Yeah.
handle these situations. Like I felt I
There
had
was no
learned something.
contact. They didn't make contact
No,
or anything with you.
no.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No. I just remember that I didn't have the feeling that I need to avoid them in the past. Just be a little bit more careful of what I do around them.
More aware.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I certainly learned that my actions towards them will have a reaction from them. And I
Hmm.
need to mind whatever action I do towards them.
That is a powerful lesson to have learned at a very young age and to have such like a vivid memory of that. And I think the way that your mom framed it honestly mirrors a lot of how we respond now as trainers. She didn't react. She got curious. Well, what did you do?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
she explained that to you. That is really interesting. And were there any other, I don't know, any other environments or situations where that maybe would have changed how you moved about that? You were a child, and children don't have awareness the same way puppies don't have awareness.
Mhm.
Even some grown dogs don't have awareness of their impact. And the fact that, I don't know, I just love that you were able to walk away with that being a two-way conversation that happened between you and the dogs and feeling and
Yeah.
understanding that even as a child. My mind's blown.
Yeah, I think it's a bit different for me since I grew up with these dogs.
Yeah.
From the moment I was born, I remember we had dogs on our street, next to our cars, everywhere. It's just that particular interaction had not happened yet to me, but I
Right.
was very well aware of the fact that we had dogs, and I remember we would feed them. Even when I
Mm,
was a very little girl, we would feed them, and my parents would always say, "Don't go towards them to touch them, because you don't know if they want that." They may want your food, but you don't know if they really want you to touch them.
yeah.
So I remember being very aware of the dog's personal spaces
Mm.
and their preferences to maybe not being touched by everyone they see. So
Which
that's
is
why I
very
think
much
I
the
took.
opposite of the American culture, which is, I want to pet that doggy, right? Everyone is just
Yeah.
going to walk up and touch your dog. Not everyone, that's a sweeping generalization. But I've heard from a lot of colleagues all over the world that they do not have that experience in their countries, where people have an
Mhm.
expectation to go up and just touch a strange dog. And I
Mhm.
was going to ask, and you've already started to answer, which I love, what are the types of things that you maybe remember being told even before that incident as a child, just in the context of these dogs? Like, how was that positioned to you from your parents?
Yeah, so this lesson about not touching was a very big one. Aside from that, I would say it was just a general way of living with them. We were always coexisting, and there was never a pressure of trying to go towards them or and put a leash on them or anything of that sorts. There was always just the way of us living together and living in parallel to each other, let's say.
Yes. Yeah.
And but also at the same time, there was like this codependency because I remember when I was a child, they would sometimes follow us to the market where we would get
They know
some
where the
meat,
food's
some
coming
eggs.
from.
Absolutely. And we would always give them some food. And then maybe they would come closer to us. So that would be our reward, that they would be closer.
Yeah.
But there was always, I would say, our living with them, our coexistence with them was non-pressure living together. It was just us being next to each other.
Less about
Um,
interacting even and more about, like you
yeah,
said, just being in parallel. I love that.
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
get the numbers wrong, so I'm not even going to try, but I heard or read something recently in the last week or two about just numbers of dogs in the world
Hmm.
and number of domesticated dogs living in partnership with the human in a home, and how we really have normalized that as that's just what it is to have a dog in the home. But like 90%, I think it's 80 to 90% of the dogs in the world do not live in a home. They do not.
Yeah,
And that's not
yeah,
the normal. That's our normal, but it's not the way it is everywhere.
absolutely. Yeah.
Another thing I was thinking is that's not my environment. I don't have dogs. I'm not tripping over street dogs every time I walk out of my house. If you, let's say, now you have dogs that you do live in partnership. You also have street dogs that you probably interact with and are building relationship with. And then you also have the rescue dogs that you're working with at the shelter and building relationship with. What would you maybe say to a new neighbor, right? A new 3 or 4 year old, maybe 5 year old child neighbor who is going through this process of understanding how to live in parallel with dogs. If you could go back and tell yourself when you were a child, even before that incident, what would be the things that you would want to say to a child to help them understand how to peacefully coexist?
I think the first thing I would say would be mind your own business.
Yep.
I would absolutely say that. Mind your own business, and very important to have understanding towards them because the environment has changed a bit. It's become a bit more urban. There's a lot more cars, a lot more bikes. Um, People are way more stressed than they were, and they sometimes react. And so our dogs react as well, and the street dogs react as well.
Mm.
And it's important to have understanding towards them. They're just doing what dogs do. They bark, they run towards cars. Our environment has definitely changed. There's a lot more triggers. People are way more stressed than they were, so they tend to overreact or react to triggers in their own environment as well. And so it's important to remember that we have to have understanding towards another species with which we coexist, because even if we don't want to, the reality is that we do coexist. And as long as we have understanding towards them and we maintain our own composure and we keep to ourselves for the most part and try to have, if we do interact with them, we try to have positive interactions. I feel like that's a good way to coexist with these dogs.
How have you handled and managed having a pet dog and navigating through those? Because I think about it's one thing to move through a street dog environment as a human, another thing to move
Mhm.
through that environment with an animal with you, with another dog with you. How have you managed that? And what are the active management strategies that do work in the presence of that higher difficulty? Or is it not
Uh,
that difficult for them?
That's what I wanted to say. It might be surprising, but actually, it's not that difficult. We just
It's
walk as if it
habituated,
were
yeah.
just me and the dogs. Like the number of street dogs that have come up to, that have rudely come up to me and my dogs is zero. Yeah. And the number of off-leash pet dogs that have come up to me and my dogs is a lot. I wouldn't know the exact number, but it's a lot. Always the street dogs, if they do approach us, they will come in an extremely polite way, with which my dogs have absolutely no problem and with which I have no problem.
Yeah.
If they don't approach us, they may bark, which is fine by me. I really don't care, and my dogs don't care either. It's again more about minding our own business. It's true, I don't let my dogs go towards a pack of street dogs because I
Right.
don't know if they would want that, if any of these dogs would want that. If I do use a management strategy, it would be just blocking. It would be putting my dogs on the other side if I see the street dogs getting a bit more agitated and barking, but that's about it. I don't do much, and it's not necessary to do that much. I feel like learning to live with dogs and animals in general is somewhat like learning a foreign language. And it's actually, in my opinion, easier and it should come more naturally than learning foreign language because I feel like we've already known this language at some point. But it's true that as our environment has changed and as we have moved more into the cities and we are less surrounded by animals, maybe we have forgotten this language a bit. And I feel like it's learning to ride a bike and then relearning to ride a bike. It's going to come naturally as long as you have someone fluent in it to teach you. It's going to come naturally to you.
I agree. I think as a species, our human nonverbal communication is something that we use all the time, but we are not aware of it. We're not aware of the information that we're putting out or taking in via body language. And it's my understanding that it's an older section of the brain that is
Mhm.
using that communication versus the newer developed section of the brain that is using verbal language. And that's why, like you said, we knew it once, but it's almost like we've forgotten how to be mindful of it, both in how we are putting it out and receiving. And a huge part of living in partnership with animals is being more intentional with your body language.
Mhm.
And not just somebody else actually on an interview for this show gave me the big light bulb moment of our body language is our words. We're communicating with our dogs all the time, clear messages with our body language. But our body language also has a tone to it. And that tone can be agitated and pent up and frustrated, or tone can be relaxed and happy and excited. And that matters. That matters so much when we are communicating with our dogs because that's a language, that's their language. And so we need to be incredibly mindful and intentional with our body language and kind of relearn to ride that bike. It'll feel a little bit awkward at first, but it's a really important first step.
Absolutely. And that's a very interesting fact about the brain. I did not know that.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of digging into the different parts of the brain and what developed when, and
Mhm.
just learning the different ages of like when in human evolution different parts of the brain developed can actually give
Mhm.
us a lot of insight into why certain functions are harder or not as developed, or why maybe newer things are overriding older things, but we can default to the more older and survival patterns in our brain. Yeah, there's a lot of evolutionary neurology, I guess you could say, that
Mhm.
also can help us understand similarities and differences with humans and dogs. Because as humans, we have a much more developed prefrontal cortex, which is going to give us the ability to do things that dogs can't. There's a lot of common misconceptions in there, right? The ability to be jealous, the ability to manipulate as such, do some of these things that I think are the dangerous side of anthropomorphizing. I think when you study the brain in that way, it can help you understand what actually is and isn't possible for dogs' brains to do.
Mhm.
But that's enough brain neurology nerd time. I would love to hear more, Holly, about what you'd like the listeners to know and what it is that you're working on and how they can get in touch with you.
So I've been working on a training program, a virtual 1 week training program. And this is going to be at a discounted price. And it's going to be for the people who maybe don't know how virtual training works or what to expect of it. I know for one, when I wasn't doing this professionally, I had no idea what virtual training means. And I wish I would have gotten a taste of it at first to know what I'm getting myself into. It's gonna be for the people who maybe need specific advice about
Mhm.
a specific problem, and they don't really need a month or longer to spend on virtual training, or for the people who just wanna know what it's like to work with me, and again, don't want to invest more time in a longer program and just want maybe 1 week to see what that's gonna be like. And
Do
they
you
can
think that
learn.
would be an appropriate amount of time for somebody who is looking to tackle what we were talking about on the front end of being really environmentally focused and hard to motivate? Would that give you time to dig into that and give some alternative strategies?
Yeah, in my opinion, it would. And it would give us time to work on some really good foundations
Yeah.
to get that engagement going. Yeah,
Yeah, because it's really hard when you can't even get a dog to want to engage in the training. It can be so hard
yeah,
to have any clue what that first step is. And I really
absolutely.
promise that once you take that first step, it gets so much easier to take the next one and the next one and the next one.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's how it goes usually.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you can find Holly on Instagram at Holly's Dog Training Academy and on her website, www.hollysdogtrainingacademy.com, both of which will be linked in the show notes. Thank you for joining us in the world of Dog Training Bytes, where every challenge brings a lesson worth sinking our teeth into. See you next time. Dog Training Bytes was created, produced, and edited by Mattison Simpson. You can connect with me on Instagram at Dog Training Bytes, that's BYTES, and at Freed by Training. For information on today's guest and resources for help with your dog or dog training education, visit www.dogtrainingbytes.stream. Looking for more? Listen to my other show, Unpacked, a clinical dog training podcast co-hosted by Sailor Jerry the dog trainer and produced by Straight Up Dog Talk LLC.